Hello and welcome to my channel. So today I thought I would go through a kind of basic starter kit. I guess it's kind of things I wish that I'd known when I first started out, so that I made a choice that meant that I was going to stand a better chance of producing work that I was more pleased with, I suppose, in the beginning. So maybe we could call this a beginner's starter kit if you are really wanting to get into using watercolour or even mixed media. So I'm going to change my camera. Here we are then. So where to start, really? Okay, maybe if we're going to be doing some watercolour, it might be with some, I'm going to move all of this out of the way, with some brushes. And you can see that I've still got the caps on these because they're new. The ones that I have been using, I think I might have one left. But funnily enough, it was because I was reaching to get these out of my store cupboard, if you like, that made me think of doing this video. So I bought this as a set. These are Van Gogh brushes. They're very reasonable, and they're a 12, an 8 and a size 4 round. And these have lasted me so probably from somewhere in 2018. So 19, 20, 23, 24. Yeah, they've lasted me a good 6, nearly 7 years before I've had to get more. And in fact, I bought these about a year ago, knowing that my brushes were getting a bit old and probably needed replacing. But I don't think that's bad for the price. So these are going to be my first recommendation. I'll just check how much they are. Where are we? So on the Amazon UK site, these are £16.74. So I will put a link below, and I will find the Amazon US link if I can. I do normally manage to find the Amazon US links. So that's going to be my first recommendation, because you can get a whole set of brushes for, I don't know, £7-8 or so, you know, from craft shops, things like that. But to be honest, you're not going to get very good results from them, and they're not going to last. Now, don't get me wrong, I have got more expensive brushes, which many of you might have seen me using. I've got my Escoda Perla brushes, and they are more expensive. But, you know, to start out with, I think these are a good compromise. So I'm just going to get a piece of paper, spare piece of paper. Let's get a spare piece of paper that I was practicing something on, use the other side. And that brings me to, you're going to need something to keep your water in. Now, I quite often use, because I use a lot of candles, I quite often use empty candle jars, because it, you know, rather than throwing them in the bin, I'm using them for another purpose. So I quite like doing that. Right, so that's your second thing. You're going to need a water pot, and you know, you can use an old mug, you can use anything that's going to hold some water for you. Some people like to use 2 pots of water. Personally, I just use 1. But there, you know, it's a preference. If you're using 2 pots of water, sometimes one of them is to clean your brush and the other one is to put it in the clean water so that it's completely clean before you move on to putting more paint on your brush. And other people will use 2 pots of water, one for warm colours and one for cool colours. I just use 1 pot of water anyway. So when we get our new brushes like this, they come with these little caps, and you need to take those off. And I was watching someone the other day saying that she reuses these, but if you know, they could go moldy if you're doing that. They're only meant for travel, really, and the brush will feel really hard, or quite hard, because it's got a little bit of a substance on there keeping its shape. Can you see the nice, if I hold it up against this piece of paper, you can see the nice point that this has got. Yes, and that's what we're looking for in a round brush. We need it to be able to come to quite a nice point. Before you use the brush, you are going to have to rinse that off. So you're just going to have to move your brush about in the water so that it ends up being nice and flexible with no more. It's kind of water-based glue, I think, that they put on there. So, but you can see that that has still come to quite a nice point. Now that leads me on to, we are quite often going to want to control the water that we're using with watercolour, and also maybe dry off our brushes at the, you know, end of using them. I do use kitchen towel, but I use it over and over and over and over again. The other thing that I use is this, which is just a microfiber cloth that you know, is quite often used for housework, or sometimes even used as dishcloths. But the good thing is that you can give these a wash and keep using them again and again. So thinking of the planet rather than kitchen roll, these are probably best. Or you could, let me see if I can find mine. You could get yourself one of these sponges. They go really, really hard. And I got mine from Temu. But I think you can buy these kind of sponges that they dry up, and then when they've got water on them, they kind of expand a little bit. I liked this one because it came in this neat little container, but you could find your own container. You could buy you know, the sponge from somewhere else, although I think this was only about £1 from Temu anyway. But of course, you know, you can wash this out, rinse it out, put it back in, use it again and again and again. So that's another alternative for something to wipe your brush with. Now let me just see, here we go. So I've got a little bit of paint left over. This is watercolour paint on this little porcelain dish. And just so that you can see why we might need all these different brushes. So this is the size 12, which can go really small. So you can get quite fine lines with it. So if you can get away, I mean, the bigger brush that you use, the better, really, because it's going to be more spontaneous and loose. But the nice thing is that you can then also get some quite thick lines. And with a round brush, you can, well, you can do lots of different things, but you can, you know, what you want is to be able to come up and down, you know, because that helps us to be able to get leaf shapes. It's why we want the point on the end, basically. So that is our size 12. Then we've got in this set a size 8. So let's get the glue off of that one. And I'm only doing something that I would have needed to do anyway because I needed to get these brushes out. So our size 8 will also do nice fine lines, as you can see, and it will do a thicker line, but not as thick as the 12. And then what we also can do, we can do the same, we can do these thick to thin kind of effects. A lot of the decisions about using your brush are to do with the size of your paper, but then also whether you are doing a kind of more background or whether you are doing something detailed. So this is our size 4, which I've just cleaned off. And so, oops, let's just make that a little bit. So you can see we can get really quite fine lines with that one as well. We can't get a particularly thick line with this one. So you can see the difference in the size 12, 8 and 4. But essentially we can still make those thick to thin marks. So I think that these brushes perform really well, and when you think that when I started using them I was probably quite heavy-handed with my brushes, for them to have lasted over 6 years is not bad. These are synthetic brushes as well, so those of you that you know, are not keen on using any kind of animal hairs, then you know, that might make sense to you. So there we go, we've got our brushes, we've got something to wipe our brush on, and we're going to need water and a container. And always good if you can do some reusing of something rather than it going in the bin. So let me just, it's our brushes, our jar and our cloth. Something else that is really handy to have is a fine mist. Now you can get these, you could either use something that has had something else in it, just wash it out and then use it as your water bottle, or you can get these from you know, any store that sells sort of household products or even gardening products sometimes, but a spray bottle is really very useful. And also a dropper bottle, because sometimes if we're using half pans or full pans of watercolour, then they go quite hard and we need to reactivate the paint so that it's softer, so as we don't damage our brushes as well, by putting a little drop of water on the pan of paint before we use it. So a little dropper is also very useful. So that's our spray bottle. So maybe now let's get to the more interesting part. Now these are the paints that I'm going to recommend. I'm sure other people on YouTube, other artists, will have their favourites. These are by Rosa Gallery, and this particular set is the Urban Sketching set of 12, but I think they do another set of 12. Equally would be good. The reason that I've chosen these is because they are very creamy, very pigmented, and they're very, very good value for money. So this Rosa Gallery set, which you can see I have been using, just need to get my piece of paper out, which somehow has got caught in the corner there. There we go. So these are the colours. You get a titanium white, cadmium yellow light, bright red, magenta rose, green, emerald green, cobalt blue, ultramarine, yellow ochre, royal brown, sepia and neutral black. And now many artists will say, well, you don't need a black and you don't need a white, but I think that is down to personal preference. And to be fair, I very, very rarely use the black. I might use the white on occasions if I want to make my paint a little bit more opaque, less transparent, in other words. Watercolour is very transparent, usually. There are some more opaque colours. But, you know, if we want to make more of what I call the pastel candy shades, then we might want to use the white, or we might just want to use the white because we're doing a white cottage, for example, a little white cottage in the countryside. So I think all of the colours are useful. In this set you've got a cool yellow and a warm yellow in our yellow ochre. You've got two blues. The ultramarine is warmer than the cobalt blue. You've got a bright red and a magenta. You've got two greens. You've got a couple of browns. And really, because you can mix your colours together once you get used to doing mixing, this is probably all that you're going to need to make a start. So that is my recommendation. Also, this little palette is rather good. It's one of the metal palettes. If you're out and about, I'll turn it over, you've got this ring for you to put your finger through and hold your palette in one hand and your brush in another, and you've got plenty of mixing space. So very pigmented. They re-wet. To be honest, I hardly ever have to use the dropper to activate these paints because they are very creamy and pigmented already. So for a pretty reasonable price, to have paints that have got good pigment in them is important. You know, some of the paints that we might get when we start out, which are more student grade, just don't they don't hold the pigment, and then our result is quite frustrating for us. So the Rosa Gallery set that I have here is £26.57. I'll find that on Amazon US as well. And the other set of 12 that they do, which has got just slightly different colours but just as good, that one is roughly the same price as well. So that's the paint that I would recommend. Let's pop those back. The other thing that we're going to have to think about is paper or sketchbooks, that kind of thing. So I've pulled a few things out that I think are possibly a good way to start. And this is a watercolor pad. So the pad is glued at one end, sometimes sort of down the side and sometimes at the top. This one is Harlemoulet, which is, I think these are all cellulose. No, some of them are 100% cotton. So you've got a mixture in here of what we call cellulose and cotton paper. Now, most artists will agree that if you are using mostly watercolour, then 100% cotton is going to be better. However, if maybe you're doing some mixed media, then you know, the cellulose paper, or sometimes it's a mix of, say, 25% cotton and 75% cellulose paper. You know, that might work out quite well. But the thing about this watercolor selection is that you've got all these different types of Harlemoulet papers that you can try out, some of which are mold made and some of which are cotton. So mold made or synthetic. So yes, good to, there's 14 sheets in here. It gives you a chance to try different types of paper to find out what might work for the kind of art that you want to produce. So I think that would be a good starting point for you to make a note of, oh, I loved how my coloured pencils went on this one, or I loved how the watercolour worked on this one, and just get an idea of the weight and the type of paper that you think is going to work best for you. So you know, from my point of view, I really prefer 100% cotton if I can get it. This is, if you know that you're going to be using a lot of watercolour and you're going to use lots of water, then I think the Arches watercolour block is probably a good way to go. This one is 300 GSM and it is 100% cotton. And it's called a block because it's actually glued. It's glued all the way around on the four sides. So nothing moves. So you don't have to worry about clipping your paper down and stopping it from buckling. And you just have a little space at the top here where you can put maybe a little thin knife or a palette knife. Sometimes a bone folder works. But yeah, or, you know, if you really wanted to, you could just maybe use your fingernails. But I tend to use a palette knife mostly. And you just pop it in between your first sheet and the next sheet. And then you allow it to go all the way around and take your painting off. So this is cold pressed paper, and cold pressed paper is well, you can have smooth paper or hot press as it's called, or you can have the cold pressed, which has got a light texture to it, or you can have rough watercolor paper. And the rough watercolor paper has much more of a bigger texture. So depending on whether you're wanting to do maybe landscapes, seascapes, mountainscapes, then you might want to go for rough paper or cold pressed. If you're thinking of doing more botanical type work, then you might want to go for something that is more like a hot press or smooth paper. But we're talking about watercolor here, and you know, I think that this this Arches cold pressed. It's not too textured, and I think it's a good in between kind of choice, if you like. So that would be my choice. This, if you want to have a bit of a play and check out lots of different papers. This, if you know that you're going to be using lots of water, you don't want your paper buckling, you want a block, and you want paper that works really well with watercolour, then that might be the answer for you. So then let's move on to some sketchbooks. When you are starting out, I think something like this Light Wish sketchbook would be quite good to use. It's cold pressed, it is 100% cotton, and it's not too big. It's about 7.5 by 7.5 inches. It works really well with watercolor, but it also works really well with other mixed media being pencils, Neocolor 2 kind of pastel crayons, yeah, lots of you know, you could add acrylic, gouache, all those kinds of things. This holds up really well, and it's a decent weight, and I've been able to use both sides. This is actually the second sketchbook that I've used from Light Wish like this, so I can recommend it. 100% cold pressed, 300 GSM, which, and I think you know, you if you get really lightweight paper in your sketchbook or in your block or in your pad, then you're going to struggle with everything buckling and maybe even, you know, coming through the other side. And when you're starting out, because you're more likely to struggle with water control, I think, you know, 300 GSM is a good starting point. So if you're wanting a sketchbook for indoors, then I think that that one is quite good as a starting point. If you're wanting one to take outside with you, then this is a Sea White of Brighton, and it's a, what size is this? This is 5.5 inches square. So it's a nice little size. It's got a little elastic that keeps it in place, and this paper works really well with all kinds of materials. So, you know, I've got Neocolors, I've got water brushes, acrylic brush pens, I've used watercolor here, I've used markers, yeah, I've used lots of things, and you can use both sides. I think this is 300 GSM, or it might be 200 actually, but I'll put a link to it. But when you're outside, obviously if you're using something like this, so another essential, I think, is to have at least a couple of bulldog clips, because when you're outside you do not want your papers blowing about. Yes, this is quite reasonably priced. Again, I'll find the link and put it below, and it's quite a decent size, So you've got your paints, you've got a little sketchbook, and then you might want to take some water and some brushes with you. So I think that works really well. So bulldog clips added to our essentials. The other thing that I personally would have loved to have known about and didn't find out until later is Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. And that's because with watercolour we either need to preserve the white of the paper, or we need to use something like a white acrylic or a white gouache to go over the top of our watercolour paint. Otherwise it just sinks in and it doesn't do what we want it to do. So for example, let's go back here. The white that I've used here is not white watercolour paint. That would have just sunk into the page and done nothing much really. So I've actually used the bleed proof white. There are other, you could use white gouache or white acrylic, but for me the brightest whitest is this Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white. And a little jar like this lasts ages. I know people that have had them for years. I probably get through one a year because I do use quite a bit. So yeah, I would say Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White is another essential that you might need. And other than that, unless you're going into mixed media, I think that, you know, this is all that you would, I'll bring it all back. This is probably all that you would need to get going with decent materials that are going to give you good results, even when you're starting out, when you're a beginner, so that you're not disappointed with your results, if you like. Yeah, I think that's about it. Okay, I'm going to leave it there because, you know, otherwise we start going into all sorts of other materials. But to start off with, I think that would work. That would work nicely. Okay, so hope that was helpful to some of you. You know, just knowing where I would start if I was starting again as a beginner. You know, these are difficult choices sometimes that we make. I know the paints I bought originally were really just ones from, you know, a big kind of craft store, and they were really chalky. They weren't transparent and vibrant. They really didn't give me the very good results, to be honest. I'm surprised I carried on, but anyway, there we are. That's my story. This is what I would have done. I even bought a pack of something like 12 brushes that cost me about £5, and obviously they didn't do the job. They didn't go to a point. They didn't last very long. They didn't hold very much water. These hold a decent amount of water for synthetic brushes. So, okay. Thank you so much, everybody. Please subscribe if you would like to. It costs nothing and it really helps me to grow. Hit the notice bell button once you've subscribed so that you get a notification when I bring out more videos. And if you liked it, give it a thumbs up, please. Okay, thanks so much, everyone, and take care. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay calm, and I hope to see you next time.